first thing is that the recession was the best thing that's ever happened to this business. And the second thing is we will only use that term in the past tense. It's the recession is behind us. So there was a mindset thing around that, looking after things around the house and doing the washing and the ironing. She said, it's like I've got my own wife. Now, when your mum says to you, it's like you are her own wife, that's that time assigned to get out and get something done. I've been running 8 to 10 meetings per week with people that wanted money. And what I didn't do was the thing that I realised after that I really desperately needed to do was take some time out. And I literally put a meeting with myself for the next 2 months. One can feel quite flush with cash after they have a lot of money into their bank account. In a couple of instances, wrote a bigger check than I would have done had it been 6 months earlier. I'm always endeavouring to learn more and to be a better person. And so anything that I approach, what possible ramifications could come from this for me in relation to my growth journey. The gifts that you have been given, the talents that you've been awarded, make sure you can. Hi, I'm Josh and welcome to Two Commas. Today we've got a really interesting episode as it's actually me that's going to be interviewed, not doing the interviewing. A few months ago, my wife Tina said to me, perhaps I should introduce myself to the audience. I assumed that people may know who I am, and it transpires that there's a lot of folk that are unaware of my history and experience base. So today I'm going to be answering the questions. I'm unaware of what those questions are going to be, and I'm quite looking forward to this conversation with my wife Tina.
Thank you, Josh. It is a delight to be on the grilling side of the equation today. Because you're right, a lot of people who have given feedback about your podcast have said, you know what, we would like to know a little bit more about your exit journey and what qualifies you to ask these questions of people through their journey as well. So my job, even though I know you very, very well, is to kind of take a very high level view of who Josh Comrie is and your own entrepreneurial journey.
Great. Looking forward to the conversation. Mm-hmm. It's funny, it's with mixed emotions for me as I have a little bit of tall poppy syndrome going on, and it probably wasn't helped by a conversation that I had for an organisation that we're both a part of, interviewing Shane Parrish, who's a bit of a hero of mine, author, New York Times bestseller. And there was some feedback that happened based on a chat that was off camera at the start for 5 minutes where I was telling Shane about what I'd been up to for the last few years. And one of the people that was in the audience said some feedback, less Josh, more Shane. Which was a bit of an unusual move because it wasn't even supposed to be broadcast. I didn't talk about myself at all during that experience. But it's with mixed emotions that I'm here doing this, but really looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, well, I think in that example, I was in the room for that interview, which you did a great job of, by the way. I do think it's really important that people know both sides of the conversational equation and, you know, why you have the authority or the experience to talk about things the way that you do. So let's get stuck in.
Let's do this.
And I'm very familiar with the way that you go through these questions in this podcast, so I'm going to follow a very similar format. Mm-hmm. So let's start for the listener or watcher and tell us a little bit about young Josh. What's your background? Where did you come from? Where did you grow up?
I'm an Auckland boy. Grew up in a largely single-parent household in Papakura. We, for the first few years of my life, were the benefactor of people's goodwill as we didn't have a home. And we had lots of love in the households, but we had no roof over our head. And so it was about 4 years old when my grandparents decided that that was enough and they should buy a house for our small family. It was my mum, my sister and I. And went to standard state school in Papakura and kind of came through there. Stepdad came onto the scene for me about 9 or 10 years old, introduced me to the notion of money and investing and finance. So got some exposure to the idea of building wealth through investment. I went to Auckland University, was not a particularly standout student. I recalled post-university that I was a good student because once I started to do IQ tests, I was able to scoring in the 130s and the 140s, which I was told was kind of genius level. Not implying I'm a genius, but the test said that I was. And I had retrofitted my school and university in my mind to being a student. Some years later, my mum gave me a compendium of all of my high school grades, and I was a decidedly C student. I realised that the Western and industrial age education system really didn't suit me, and I flourished in an environment where I was able to self-learn, self-direct, and pick things up and apply those things quickly. So I did, however, pass university. I crammed 3 years into 4 and ended with a double major in commerce, accounting, and marketing. Practiced in accounting for a period of time, applied my marketing skills for a period of time. Before I landed in the UK, I hit a career ceiling at 22 years old as I was running a district for a company that I worked for, Tony Falkenstein's company, Just Water. Had Tony on the show a few weeks ago, remains a close friend and mentor of mine still to this day. I won't age myself by saying how long ago this was, but let's say it was the 90s that I entered the workforce. I arrived in the UK with a bank account full of money, actually. I'd done very well financially early on and still continued to invest. And so I stumbled, having worked in accounting, I stumbled into executive search or headhunting, a very ripe and fresh-faced 23-year-old. In hindsight, I really didn't know anything about that industry or the businesses that I was recruiting for, but had a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of motivation and also a desire to kind of self-learn, self-direct and grow. Took me a little while to find my feet, but then thrived, succeeded in that space. 1998 rolled around, and it was clear to me that I had to make the decision of living in the UK for the long term or returning to New Zealand. And I decided, based upon some friends that I had that were in their late 30s, early 40s, who were Kiwis that had gone to the UK, who felt very much stuck, handcuffed to that place because they felt like a foreigner back in New Zealand when they returned, and they had property in the UK, etc. And they were miserable because of climate, lifestyle, commuting, all that sort of stuff. It's not great in the UK. And so, wonderful city to live in as a young person, but once you get a bit older, you want to have a little bit more freedom and lifestyle and access to nature and that sort of thing. So, returned to NZ in 1999. Y2K was a big deal, and there were billboards with cockroaches on them. The bug is coming, you need to be in tech. And there were, articles in the business press about people investing in technology. It was really clear to me I needed to be in technology. So I got into tech in 1999, which was one of the great kind of timing moves that I've been able to do in my life. I've made some terrible timing decisions, but that was a great one. And worked in the ERP space for a period before returning to executive search. Really enjoyed the influence you can have on an organisation through introducing spectacular talent. I'd made an agreement with myself as a 22, 23-year-old that I needed to be in self-employment by the time I was 30, start my own business by the time I was 30. And so I kicked around looking at that for a few years. I'd picked up inadvertently a belief from someone else that I needed to have a business partner to start a business, and that held me back for a couple of years. And ultimately I realised that if it is to be, it's up to me. That was a Tony Robbins expression that I picked up. And so I kicked off my first venture in 2004. So that's kind of the backstory of young Josh.
That's a lot of ground to cover there, a couple of decades almost. And I think it is really important that people understand that you have a very strong, self-directed method behind everything that you do. And if you don't mind, I'd just like to dig into that a little bit, because I think you mentioned that your stepdad introduced you to the concept of money and investing and wealth creation at an early age. And that's not necessarily something that's all that common, especially for New Zealanders and perhaps elsewhere in the world as well. Can you tell me a little bit about how that might have shaped the direction that you took in your career?
Yeah. So a couple of things. My 12th birthday present from Derek was a paper round, which was a job, and I had to turn up to that job on that morning, middle of winter, as I'm a June baby. And it wasn't the most enjoyable experience, but it was made clear to me that the best thing for me to do was to stay in that job, which I did. And my first paycheck for a week's work, 6 days a week in the morning, New Zealand Herald, was $11.50, which in today money would be something like $60 to $70, I would guess, maybe even more actually. And so I was a intermediate age kid, and so that money went into the bank account, and every now and then I'd take some money out to buy a record or to go and see a movie. So I got to understand the concept of money, income, and then expenses. And the stock market at that stage was going through a period of real kind of growth. We're talking in the mid-'80s here, and it was literally just popping off. And so I started to invest in the stock market through Derek's suggestion and had a stellar run over the next kind of 2 years or so. And so I started to understand how to pick stocks, how to identify winners, and I, frankly invested in things that I understood. Rainbow Corp, which owned Rainbow's End, which was then bought by Equity Corp. Then there was Briley, and that he was doing M&A, roll-ups and leverage buyouts. So I started to get across this stuff as like a 13-year-old kid. So I got into this amazing education on money, which was not given to me at school. So I did economics, I did accounting, but very much rote learning, telling you about the principles of economics rather than the principles of money, which is quite fundamentally different things. They're both important to understand, but if you have one without the other, then it's like kind of only being able to see out of one eye and in black and white, perhaps. That's the only analogy I can come up with. So I really started to understand super early the importance of top line, bottom line, managing your expenses really closely and clearly, discretionary income, and buy things only when you have the ability to pay for those things. I've never bought anything on tick other than homes. Obviously, property, I take debt on for that, but that's an asset. That's not not an expense. But I've never bought a car on tick. I've never bought clothes on tick. That sort of thing just seems to me just totally foreign. Why take debt on for something which is really just an expense that you should be able to be yourself? So that really shaped at a super young age the notion of income. I started to actually lend money to the neighbourhood kids. So I was I wasn't a loan shark, although the rates were quite sharky. My recollection is kind of 10% a month, which 120% a year these days is a bit loan sharky. But hey, they had no other source of money to be able to borrow, so that was the option for them. So that also enabled me to see ways that I could leverage the money that I had as well beyond the bank. And in these days, by the way, the interest rate was high inflation interest rates of kind of 17, 18%. I remember going to the bank one day as a high school age kid. I would have been 15, I think. And I had a couple of $1,000s that I'd saved at that stage, a lot of money for a kid of that age. And this is all, it wasn't pocket money. I didn't get any pocket money. I was paid to mow the lawns once a week, and there was just jobs that you did around the house. You had to participate in the household, and that was either doing things like in the vegetable garden or painting the house or working on the farm, whatever that stuff may be. But I remember going to the bank as a 15-year-old, and there was a guy behind the counter who was 2 years ahead of me at school, and I said, I'd just like to inquire about term investment rates, and he knew my face from school, and I was literally a spotty-faced 15-year-old. And he laughed at me. He literally, and he goes away and he gets this thing and he kind of throws this over and he goes, "How much do you got to invest?" And I said, $2,000. And his face went white. And it was really clear to me at that stage, like, here's a kid, I don't know what he would be making, probably something like $4 an hour, I suspect, but probably in and then straight out again. And it was really obvious that he didn't have that sort of money. And he was looking at me like, how the hell did this kid get this money? So it was one of the many lessons that I had around income and investing at a really young age.
That's all very interesting background, and I'd just like to elaborate a little bit more on your attitude towards money as a concept, because a number of people feel awkward about charging what they're worth. In fact, you wrote a very interesting LinkedIn post about that just yesterday, and about how people feel slightly uncomfortable sometimes about charging more or charging what they're worth, or just even the concept of having a lot of money is foreign to some people, especially in the sales function. So selling for a business, as you know, is one of the most critical functions of any business, especially as a founder. You need to be the rainmaker. Tell me a little bit about how you feel about money as a concept, and about how important it is as a founder to have a very strong sales focus.
Money is an idea, and it's, I believe, the biggest collective idea and ideology that we have come to an agreement on in the world today. The first big one was religion or faith. And so we started to believe in gods because we had to explain the things that were going on around us in relation to the climate and growth of crops and this sort of thing. So around about the time of the agricultural revolution 10,000 years ago, we started to invent the notion of gods. And we were, poly with the God belief. Pagans is what we refer to them to as today. The Romans, the Greeks, etc. And then the Catholic Church and other churches with their single deity kind of took over. We've moved from religion and faith as being the big idea that we believe in and agree to, and now it's moved to money. So money is simply a agreed store and exchange of value. That's how you define money if you go to the dictionary. And unfortunately, it's got a lot of emotion tied up and a lot of angst tied up in money these days. And I think perhaps the great benefit that I had was that I was exposed to it at a young age. And it really just became a mechanism for me, like an instrument to me, as opposed to being something which had fear, doubt, scarcity, worry, all the things that I understand that people have around that subject today. And so those things, really quickly transfer across into the belief of what someone is worth. And it is just an idea. And so if you believe that you are worth more, typically you're able to charge more for that. There's some confidence and there's some positioning and there's, marketing and a whole lot of things that go around the outside of that. But at its core, if people don't believe in the notion that money is just an idea, then it will hold them back from being able to gain separation and perspective on money. I remember I went through the Toastmasters. I've talked about growth a little bit, but growth is at my core. It's what we refer to these days. Before to me it was education and learning and knowing more originally and then being more latterly, but maintaining both of those things in mind at the same time. And so I went through the Toastmasters education in my late 20s, 26, 20 to 29, I think it was, and club level, regional level, and got a bit of exposure to the international as well. Wonderful organisation. Can't recommend it highly enough to anyone, simply to enable you to be a better communicator. Originally at a group level, but it translates into one-on-one as well. And we had a program, the club was running out of funds because we'd had someone that wasn't really all that capable as the treasurer, and we had some money in the bank and then we'd kind of depleted the funds down and we wanted to move to a nicer place for breakfast and we wanted to buy a new flag. Our flag was old and tatty and, a sceptre maybe as well. Maybe I'm making that up, but we needed to make some money. And so I went, I said, we can make a program out of this and sell this program to businesses, teach people how to be public speakers. And I went with one of the other members who had been around the club for about 20 years. And at that stage, I think I was the Sergeant-at-Arms, which is the step that you take before being the president of the club. These are grandiose titles. These are small, individual club units of 30, 40 people or so. Great leadership experience because everyone's a volunteer. So you only have influence with those folk. There's no power. And so terrible form of leadership when you have to rely on power, by the way. So we went to Tegel, I remember, and it was the employer of one of our members in the club. And we went and sit with HR and I just invented this program and it was 10 weeks and it was 8 people from the organisation and they were going to do a weekly exercise and different people from the club would volunteer to roll their way through. And the member that I was in the meeting with, Keith, lovely guy, great communicator, but had the restriction around money. And it got to the money bit of the conversation. I'd sold the vision and what's possible with it and understood what their problem was and aligned what we could do with what the problem was. We just need our managers and leaders to be better communicators in a group setting and got a conference coming up and I'm like, it's wonderful, certainly the right thing. And then there was the question of money. So how much will this cost? And Keith just froze and we hadn't talked about it beforehand. We didn't think it would get to the money conversation in that meeting. So I'm like, that'll be $5,000 for the duration of the course. And she goes, that sounds great. When can we start? And Keith was just rolled out of the meeting and he was high-fiving me and I hadn't, again, attached to that he wasn't this guy that got it. He was an accountant, which you'd think he would have comfort with talking about money, but he really didn't. The funny thing was we then rolled that program out about 8 organisations over the next 18 months and we had volunteers and we ended up with a complete opposite problem. We had about $50,000 in the bank account, and this is 20 odd years ago, and we had to stay. We're a incorporated society, which is a form of a charity, and so we had to start giving this money away. So we had this reverse problem where we had too much money inside the club because we'd started to sell these and deliver these programs. But essentially, at its core, it was about understanding your value and your worth to the organisation. And we had some conversation at a club level, and it was like people are talking about $1,000 for this thing. I'm like, there's no way. That's just nowhere near enough money for us to charge for this experience, because it's not about the fact that we're volunteers. It's about the value that the organisation will see. And if we were showing 8 people over 8 weeks how to become great communicators, that's definitely worth $5,000. In today money, that's probably $15,000. By the way, for anyone who wants to deliver that program.
There's a hot tip. So you obviously had too much money in the bank. You'd already bought yourself a new flag, probably some gold-covered sceptre.
I had a sceptre.
Yep, I can imagine. So, all right, let's take it back to young 29 going on 30-year-old Josh, who has this idea in his head about needing to or wanting to be self-employed at that stage. Tell me a little bit about what was going through your head and the starting / origin story of the business that you started at that time.
I was 30, and the agreement that I'd had with myself was have my own business by 30. And, the games that we play with ourselves where we kind of fudge things a little bit. And I was sitting in this really well-paid corporate gig, making a lot of money for a character of that age, but I was miserable. Didn't like the organisation, loved the people, but the organisation was quite flawed in many ways. And the offering wasn't really a great one into the market, but I'd been running another business that had been bought by that company. So I had observed that there were some changes that were going on around me, and I was on the cusp of resigning from the company and going and getting something done. I didn't know what that something was. And we had the global CEO come and visit the New Zealand branch. There was about 350 people, give or take, in the organisation at that stage. I was in a leadership role, and not executive suite. And they visited the CEO, and this HRD director had been hired, and the 3 organisations that they'd been at beforehand had been restructured. And I'm like, I can just smell a restructure. And my colleagues were going, this is great. These people are amazing. It's wonderful. It's going to be, and I'm like, do you not see what's happening here, guys? Like, there's going to be a restructure. But I went and spoke to the CEO, and I said, expressed my, what's going on around here. He was a friend of mine, having been part of the business that had been acquired. I took over and ran it once he left to go overseas. And so he then came back as the CEO of the NZ branch. So this restructure was going on, and I managed to kind of time my resignation with not resigning to get myself in the position of being made redundant. Everyone gets made redundant at least once in their career, and that was my moment, which was great because it was a US corporate and we had a very generous redundancy package. I then decided I didn't know what I was going to do. I'd been looking at building software, getting the license for software, or getting certified and skilled up in something or other, and then selling my time for money. I'd come from tech, so software was much more aligned with where I wanted to go, but I didn't really have a clear sense of what the next big wave was going to be, because we're early noughties now, 2003, 2004, and so we'd gone through the tech boom, and then we'd had the tech wreck, and New Zealand hadn't really started to fire again, and it was very fragmented. The market was highly fragmented, and so the ERP wave had kind of come through a little bit, and there was the mid-range things that were going on, and it wasn't really clear the right space to be in. So I decided that I'd take a couple of months from summer just to reflect on things, and that meant take summer off and have a good time. And I actually moved back in with my original flatmates, which is code for my parents. And so I was having a great time with my parents, and they went back to work, and they travelled for a little bit, and just having out around the house, of course. And Mum comes home from work one day, and I'd done the washing, and I'd had dinner ready, and Mum said to me, "This has just been so wonderful to have you home, son. Looking after things around the house, and doing the washing and the ironing." She said, "It's like I've got my own wife." Now, when your mum says to you, "It's like you are her own wife," that's kind of code. That's like time assigned to get out and get something done. So the next day, I sat down and kind of reviewed all the things that I'd been looking at, and I decided to train and certify as a coach. Now, back in 2004, coaching wasn't a thing. There really wasn't anyone practicing in New Zealand in that space. And so got the certification, trained certified in global coaching cert, and then started to build a practice around this. And what I discovered was that a lot of the time I was educating people as to what this was. And I'd come from a background of executive search. I'd spent some time in ERP software and integration software. And so I kind of had this view of the world of a bit of services, a bit of product, and a bit of kind of integration of things to make all the stuff work. And then I was doing this thing in and around executive search, and around executive coaching. And so pretty clearly to me, after a couple of months, delivering some great experiences, having a good time, I was really constrained by the amount of hours in the day. So I needed to get away from that. And so I morphed the offering away from being just coaching into being executive search and coaching, and offered them independently for a period of time, but then decided to make the offer of them being both of those things together in the market. And I was just waiting for the world to go, that seems like a really good idea. Let's do this thing as well. So a lot of Me Too copycat competitors. And nobody ever did. I've only ever come across one firm globally. It's a crazy notion because coaching, as you well know, T, is the working with an individual to enable them to achieve greater outcomes and grow along the way. And so we would find appoint and then develop the person in the job. So our success rate was huge, and we had something so super compelling and different in the marketplace that we were operating within, and it was authentically a win-win-win situation. And people talk about that, but not always is that absolutely the case. But it was a win for us as the exec search because we had a more likelihood of success with that person, and their transition was managed really, really closely, and with someone who cared about the outcomes that they were seeing for themselves. The business had a more productive person who was able to overcome the early speed humps that happened, and the individual had someone who cared for their success, like just an absolute win-win-win. So a critical part of that business still to this day. So we then set about kind of bolting on a large resource augmentation, like a contracting business alongside that, and that business just went from strength to strength over the next few years.
We haven't actually talked about what that business is called.
Oh, Potentia. So Potentia without the L. It's so Potentia is a Latin word, and all of my companies have Latin names, and that means, like most Latin words, empower. So power and empower is Potentia. So funnily enough, since then, this is how much the world's changed. So I registered the company in 2004, and naming space was wide open. There was no Potentia in any space anywhere globally. The last time I checked, there was about 18 globally, including a very aggressive VC firm out of Australia called Potentia that has some quite bad press here because of their highly inflated valuations and really, really super aggressive behaviour that they've conducted. Different business, just for clarity's sakes.
That's good to clarify because people do often ask about you when they're talking to me, and inevitably Potentia might come up and they think that's the Potentia that you're referring to, but it's not that. Potentia is the executive search and recruitment firm based out of Auckland, but with national coverage.
National, Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch and Dunedin.
That's right. So Potentia, let's talk about a little bit later on. You've grown this firm. I understand there were some pretty big roadblocks or hiccups along the way in terms of the economy. Tell me about how you navigated that time.
Oh, the GFC. So we had a great 4 years of growth, and we had an Auckland and Wellington presence at that point. And then 2008, I'd taken what was ostensibly my first holiday. And, when you run a business, when you start a business, it's an intense period of your life. I thought at that stage I was running a startup. I wasn't. I define a startup now as being offering something to the world that has not been offered before, and often understanding a problem in a way that others have not seen. And so therefore you're solving a misunderstood or an unclear problem for people. And so you're building something from the ground up, typically product related. That's what I view a startup as being. So it's the hardest of the hard of the hard. This was me starting what I call a glow up, which was a business that is in an existing space that people are aware that they need the service provision within, and we had a different model for that. So I call that a glow up. And so notwithstanding any of those things, the first 4 years were intense. 60, 70-hour weeks, of course, and no holidays, other than Christmas time, 2 weeks mandatory, but I didn't take any time off during the year. So I was in Europe with a good buddy and my then partner, and it was a 3.5 week holiday, September 2008. On the tube on the way back to Heathrow to come back to New Zealand, there used to be a free newspaper there, Metro I think it might have been called, front page, Lehman Brothers collapse. I'm like, okay, so New Zealand at this stage, we'd only had some finance companies collapse. I say only, it was a reasonably big deal, billions of dollars of largely superannuitants money got lost by unscrupulous and incompetent operators. Alan Hubbard and some other bits and pieces, South Canterbury Finance and some other organisations as well. And so loss of wealth, but the economy was essentially thriving at that stage. But it was really clear to me that things were going to get a lot worse than they were. The economic indicators, remember the investment mindset, so I still had a strong eye in the markets and what was going on around the world. And, it looked like we were going to be in for some pretty tough times. So I stopped investment in projects. We had 3 projects on the go at that stage, business improvement projects. Stopped that, made sure that we maximised revenue, so ceased expenditure beyond salaries, reduced advertising, and essentially stockpiled cash for the last 3 months of the year. It was August actually, so we had September to December. Left at the end of the year with a very healthy bank balance, and then in January, everything completely stopped. So we came back in with a team of people that were focused on, kind of getting out there and delivering to projects and making sure that the business grew. And then the phone stopped ringing, and then people stopped calling us back, and then people wouldn't take our calls any longer. And so in early February, it was really obvious that what I feared may happen was happening. So I got the team together, and this is a really formative moment in that business and in my kind of leadership journey as well, as I made it clear to the team. I was very transparent with them what was available funds-wise, the amount of money that was sitting in the bank, and what the fixed expense base. I gave them a rudimentary accounting lesson. This is the fixed expense base. Obviously, these are largely salaries, a little bit of rent, and we've got essentially about 7 months of money available. I've always maintained that you should have at least 3 months operating cash available in the bank. The COVID time exposed how many companies had 2 weeks to 6 weeks of cash available. That's irresponsible and disgusting in my mind. You should not be running a business that way. So we had 7 months. And so I made it clear that this was not about me. This is about us. This is our money. It's not my money. I was a sole shareholder at that stage, but we're in this together. What are we going to do about it? So we brainstormed, came up with some ideas, and we had a couple of really great ideas, and that gave the team something to focus on. And it was something that gave us the ability to be contrary to what was happening out in the world, which was doom and gloom and disaster, and companies going to the wall, and rounds and rounds of redundancies, and it was an awful time, immensely stressful. We started that project in early February, and then we did a number of rounds of kind of talking to a range of different people. Essentially, it was a really large market research project, but then it gave us some ability to get some press and some coverage, and they were contrary to the economic indicators that were there, and it gave us a platform to stand on, and also a reason to talk to people, which was possibly the most important thing. And then in June, after all of our competitors had made massive cuts and gone to the wall, the phone started to ring, and then it kept on ringing. And over the next 18 months, we tripled the size of the business off that base that we had, because I didn't make a single redundancy. And so the team was intact, and we'd done pretty well with the fixed amount of money that we had available, and preserved some of that. But then we just went through this rapid growth phase, and we went from being a mid-market player to being the number one dominant player in the country, and never left that position from that moment forth. So it was fairly tense and quite stressful as a period of time, and it was super formative. And I remember getting to the start of 2010. So the other thing that I started to do personally in the background was I started to invest quite heavily in commercial industrial property, and it was a wonderful time to buy those types of assets, 2009, 2010, and then through to 2016, I continued to buy those things because they were massively undervalued and great opportunities, and the economy was starting to recover and thrive. And so I started 2010, and I said, there's 2 things that I need to kind of make really clear about today. We had a half-day symposium to kick the year off and continue to do so to this day. The first thing is that the recession was the best thing that's ever happened to this business. And the second thing is we will only use that term in the past tense. It's the recession is behind us. So there was a mindset thing around that. And the team had, thrived, and we, by then we'd doubled, and then we added another, we doubled again, kind of thing. So we've tripled in size over that period. It was a great learning experience and a wonderful time for us. The office, that, in fact, that we're sitting in today was the second space that I purchased in the city. Beyond that point, the first one was down the corridor here in Shortland Street.
I think there's a lot of parallels that people can probably relate to and what you're discussing there. Perhaps not yet the growth out of the big R word, the big recession. It may not necessarily be in our rearview mirrors yet for those of us still running businesses. So I think there's a lot of interesting insights that can be taken away from that, including just pick up the phone, make the sales, focus on the top line, have enough cash in the bank to be able to operate your business responsibly through really hard times. You're very right. There was a lot of businesses that were caught with their pants down. What's the saying? It's only when the tide goes out that we all discover who's been swimming naked.
Yeah, and I adopt a stoic approach to these things. At the very core of stoicism is the belief, the awareness that there's very, very little that we can control in the world. And really, we have the ability to control what we make things mean. So how we're interpreting the world of information and the things that are happening around us, and then how we react or respond to those things. Response is considered, reaction is immediate and emotional. And so I think that during that period, and perhaps during last year, and I am aware that we have a few immigration adjust the economic figures over this period. It's been longer than the GFC was, so it has to some extent been more challenging. And we came off the back end of essentially 13 years of growth. And so for a lot of people, I remember talking to your team at the start of 2000, and it would have been 23, I think. And I said, there's a recession coming to the team. It hadn't hit at that stage, but it was really obvious to me that we were going to have some pretty difficult times. I think we started at 23, is that correct?
I think so.
And two of the team said, what's a recession? One of them had done a business degree. And the first thought of mine was, have you been living under a rock? Is this the first time you've ever experienced anything economic related? Because that's pretty poor awareness. But then I explained what it was and what it meant. But the reality is, for a lot of organisations, they've been used to really, really positive times. And I need to say this, and it's not the easiest thing to hear, but I have lived through a number of these cycles before. And so I kind of view a difficult recession as being like the fire that impacts the forest. It's brutal. It's hard, it's painful to go through, and at the other end is growth. The other end is growth and rejuvenation. And so, if anyone's watching this and they've lost their business, I'm deeply sorry for the experience that you've had. It's a really, really tough experience, and this too shall pass.
So you've succeeded in, staving off the recessionary scaries, and you've actually grown this potential to this market-leading business. What happens now? So when does the exit start entering your mind? When do you start thinking about maybe you could sell this, or maybe you want to leave this business? What was going through your mind there?
It actually started at the very start of the business. So in 2004, 2005, it was really clear to me that I need to bring some people into the team that could grow with the business and potentially be people that could take on a leadership role and maybe possibly even look into getting into a management buyout situation. And so in 2011, 2012, we started a project called Project Moonshot to kind of reinvent and refocus and change the business. It was ill-advised. I spent about $1.5 million on this project to kind of refocus the business into a different market space. The market didn't want what the offering became, and the team were not the folk that could move the business into that space. So once I unwound that, I had a kind of frank look in the mirror and realised that it wasn't the business that needed to change, it was Josh that needed to change. And so I was able to, through the virtue of the team that I'd brought on, and one of those team, particularly Nathan Tokerty, Bryant Tokerty, had stepped into the general management role and had bought a number of shares in the company at that stage. We had a conversation, and it was really clear that we should just kind of move into what I call the succession form of exit. I really love the succession form. It's selling to business partners, to family members, or to management team. And so this was a bit of management team and a bit of business partners. The brand gets to continue in the marketplace. I left some shares, some equity in the business. I still maintain that today. And those folk that have been instrumental in the growth of the company get to take the business to the next level. We were doing kind of something in the region of just a shade under $20 million at that stage, and these days it's nudging up towards the 9-figure revenue stage. And I'd really taken it from the start, the growth, into being a market leader, but there was much more that we could do with the business, and it wasn't really the skill set nor the interest that I had to do so. And so we went through a process that was quite quick, which is the other great thing about a succession exit, is you can navigate your way through them in a period of months. You don't have lengthy earnouts. It tends to not be a handcuffed situation that the founder may face for a period of time. So that was my first kind of, I had sold some shares along the way, but it was my first kind of full proper exit.
So, various different forms of exits, which you can go into. I know of before, succession being one of them. So it's not necessarily a clean, cut and dry, sold, you get to exit. You did a gradual buyout. Is that correct?
Yeah, over a period of time, but there was a critical moment in 2015, I think from recollection, critical moment that we kind of went through the process and relatively quickly that saw us kind of land on an outcome that we're all really happy with, and then move ahead with it, and then me exit the operations of the business, and took some time out before I kicked my next venture off, which was Ambit, the AO play. In the background, I'd formed another couple of businesses in and around the kind of human capital space as well. One of them was not the right fit for the market, so pulled the pin. So I had a business that put a bit of time and energy into that didn't succeed. So I've kind of got that experience. And then the other, we went through a trade sale for that business, and within the Ambit business, I led and grew that company for 4 years as the founder and CEO, then stepped onto the board as chair, and then ultimately we went through an economic exit with that business. So we actually sold that to a customer in the end. So I've experienced succession and economic, the strategic and acqui-hire. I've been involved in multiple of those as an advisor and as an investor.
So your first exit with Potentia was really a succession exit. No, I know that's not the only type of exit. Would you mind giving a quick overview of the other types of exit?
Yeah, sure. I've developed a thing that I call the exitometer, which is a flash way of describing a quadrant. And so a quadrant is a XY axis. On the horizontal axis, we have money. So in other words, on the right-hand side of that continuum, we have more money. And on the left, we have less money. And on the vertical axis is time. Time and money, the two most important things when it comes to assessing almost everything in life that have some finances attached to it. The succession exit is in the bottom left-hand side of the quadrant. So it does tend to be quicker than what I call an economic exit, which is one where you get the accountants pouring through the books and they talk about net present value and they deduct things for wages and all these kind of crazy kind of things. It's a really difficult journey for founders to go through. So typically the succession exit is selling to business partners or to family or to staff. Management buyout is one of the names that also gets attached to it. I call it succession because the business tends to succeed after you have left and you get to leave a bit of a legacy behind that as well. On the right-hand side, which is the more money, top right-hand side, more time, is the strategic exit. A lot of information you can find on my website about that and download the ebook as well. And on the bottom right-hand side is more money and also very quick. It's the acqui-hire, very tech heavy term, but it's starting to bleed out into other services businesses and beyond into different adjacent sectors. So yes, succession, the reason I chose that was it would allow me to exit the business very quickly, as once I realised that it wasn't the business that needed to change but me, I didn't want to delay that by 12, 24, 36 months. I really wanted to get going. That was one of the motivers. The other one was that I had some great people that had been on that journey with me, and I wanted them to be able to share in the ongoing success of the business, thus them buy a chunk of shares from me. And they've indeed followed through and done a stellar job of that.
Amazing. So given the potential exit was your first exit, I know you've had lots of others since, or been part of lots of others since. What advice did you get or seek when you went through that process? Because you'd never done it before, and I'm assuming this podcast didn't exist, so you couldn't get information from others. Did you seek professional advice? Did you have counsel in some way, shape or form?
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, I didn't get great advice, which is one of the reasons that ultimately I've ended up in the place in the world that I have today. So I call it Capeloit because it's the unknown Big Four brand. So sought them out for assistance with valuation. And after a few weeks, we had the classic bait and switch, which was the very impressive looking and smelling partner came in, who was quickly replaced by two relatively inept graduates. And I received a fancy report a couple of weeks later, which was about 25 pages in length. And there were references to 4 different companies that were not my own. So no one had done Control F on this document. Astounding. I paid $20,000 for this report.
Outrageous.
And it was not relevant at all to my business nor the industry that we operated within. It was disgusting, actually. And after they went away and fixed it up and actually put some effort into this thing, I got the partner back into the office and I said, look, I've really got only one question for you. It's how do I increase the value of this asset? And the answer that I got was you need to really maximize and drive customer revenue. You need to increase your net derived margin inside the business, drive up where you can your gross margin, ensure you've got good continuity of people and staff, and that make sure that your bottom line is ever increasing. I said, hold on, so you're telling me to increase revenue and increase profits? The partner said, actually, yes, that's what I'm telling you to do. I realised now that like the homeless guy that sits outside my office can probably tell me that's how to increase a business's value. So I went out and sought some insight from, funnily enough, a co-tenant in the building that I was in. They were an M&A advisor. I spoke to investment bankers and I spoke to people that have been through the exit journey themselves. And I started to understand how to increase the value of that asset. And there's a whole range of different things that you can do to achieve that, to drive you into either strategic side of the quadrant or into the acqui-hire side of the quadrant. But one of the key pieces of advice that I'll share here is that the investment banker said to me, the most important thing that you can do when people start looking around your business is don't take your eye off growing and running your business, because the temptation will be to focus on the DD and focus on that exit journey. In reality, a lot of the time that won't result in an offer that you will be prepared to accept. And so if you've taken your eye off the ball, your business becomes worth less because you won't have achieved the objectives you set out to in the first place. And so thus you won't have achieved your strategy. And then often what can happen, and I've subsequently seen this, is that someone who is sniffing around takes a year, maybe 18 months to go through that process. You lose focus on what's important inside your business. The asset decreases in value and they turn up with a lower offer, which after that period of time, the founder has become frustrated and is maybe prepared to accept it. So that's just a really simple but super effective thing. If anyone's looking at buying your business, make sure that you or someone in your team is able to run and grow your business if you get involved in that DD kind of evaluation process.
That's right. I've heard from all the other episodes I've listened to of this podcast and from others in their exit journeys, the exit process can be incredibly distracting for the founder and the team who are involved in the DD process. So
brutal and it nearly killed me are two terms that pop into mind that are direct quotes from those founders. So it is a challenging journey, particularly if one is unprepared to navigate that journey. And a key part of what I do now is to help folk be better prepared and increase the value of that asset so that it becomes a much more seamless and less painful journey for them to go through.
So let's talk about on the other side of the exit. So you've got a bit of money in your bank account and you've got a bit of freedom with your time. Josh has exited Potentia. What happened then?
It was tough. I didn't realise at the time, but I had a reasonable degree of my identity tied up inside the business. I was the sole founder, and the business someone said to me, your DNA is stamped all over this business. And the two were intrinsically interlinked for a period of time. And so I was kind of a bit lost for a period of time. The first thing that I did was maintain my habit of being busy, because that's what I'd done for the last 20 odd years. And so my calendar was really full. I distinctly remember I left the operations of the business at the end of September. And so therefore I had 3 months until Christmas. And so I remember getting to Christmas and saying to my then partner, I'm really looking forward to having a holiday. And she said to me, what have you been doing all this time for the last couple of months? And I looked at my calendar, I looked back, and I'd been running 8 to 10 meetings per week with people that wanted money. Typically I was an active investor, and so they knew that. I was talking to people about ideas and what I was considering doing next. And what I didn't do was the thing that I realised after that I really desperately needed to do, was take some time out. Like take a fucking break. And I literally put a meeting with myself for the next 2 months, and that expanded out to 4 months, which was wonderful. Travelled, saw friends, picked up some hobbies that I'd wanted to immerse myself more deeply in, spent time with family, and just really kind of got myself over the process of going through the builds, the scale, and then the sell process of that business. And also got connected with what was really important to me in the next venture. So a bit of a manifesto in terms of what it was that I was going to be oriented towards. Otherwise, what I probably would have done was to jump into business with one of those ideas, one of those people really early on, without knowing why and what it was that I was endeavouring to head towards.
Is there anything that you wish you'd done differently about your potential exit or any subsequent exits?
I've been involved in a lot now. So my own businesses, there was another 3. And then as an investor, it's 9 exits now. And half of those I've been involved in an advisory capacity. So I've seen a lot, and there's been some that have fallen over along the way as well. And so I think that probably the big single thing is the identity piece. It's kind of making sure that one, as in me, the individual, the founder, is really separate from the asset itself. And that's both, operationally, process-wise, but they're not caught up in the headspace of that being an extension of themselves. Name above the door is one of the many signs that could indicate that that asset is not an independent asset. The knowledge of where one will apply their efforts next, whilst making sure they have some time out. If one's building a startup, then it's a brutal journey. A startup being defined as doing the thing that no one's ever done before. If one's building a services company, that's a hard journey. If one's building a product company, that's a hard journey. They're all very, very difficult journeys. Funnily enough, a number of the folk that I've interviewed on the show, some of them on, some of them off camera, have said if they had known how difficult that journey was going to be before doing it, they may not have done it. And so therefore, I don't regret any of the businesses that I've been involved in any way, shape or form. But looking back, what I would have done was be really intentioned about that time out beforehand. When I went through an exit of my 4th business, Ambit, I intentionally took some time out, and that was 6 months. That is a luxury, and I understand that luxury and privilege. But when you've had the incredible hard work, the massive amounts of stress and cortisol that's related to it, the sacrifices that you have to make around the outside in terms of friends, family, travel, those sorts of things, the things that make life rich, then taking that time out is super, super important. Probably would have been a little more pointed with some of the investments that I made. One can feel quite flush with cash after they have a lot of money into their bank account. And I, in a couple of instances, 2 specifically spring to mind, I perhaps wrote a bigger check than I would have done had it been 6 months earlier, and an inappropriately sized check for those investments. So going back to first principles in terms of what I was looking for, go back to the playbook, how I go about evaluating an investment opportunity, and kind of stick to the same check size, because write a few of those checks and remind yourself that actually perhaps I should go back to how I was doing this before. So those are probably 3 key lessons.
Oh, my question. That's right. So on the key lessons, you've asked this of several of the guests on this podcast, and I've found their answers to be some of the most insightful content that I've really enjoyed. And that is, what is your business ethos? Do you have one or two principles that you really like to stick to in business now with all of your experience?
So I refer probably to my values. So growth is at the core of my value set. So I'm always endeavouring to learn more and to be a better person. And so anything that I approach, I kind of go, what possible ramifications could come from this for me in relation to my growth journey? And so over time, you realise that once you achieve a certain level of financial freedom, which I have been very lucky to achieve a number of years ago, then it becomes less about the money that you can make. It's helpful over time, and certainly giving it away to charity is a wonderful experience. But there's sacrifices that you need to make. So the second part of that is to be conscious of the compromise, the sacrifices that every decision make. Every decision has consequences. And so I need to be clear for myself and for others what the consequences of that decision is going to be. So just reflect quite clearly on the possible ramifications of getting involved in something, helping people make that same decision as well. It's incredibly easy to start or get into something, be that a business, a marriage, having a family start, having a baby. Those things are really easy to get into, and they're very difficult to get out of. And so thinking quite clearly about what that path could look like, again, for me or for others, is a super helpful thing. I think, things like integrity is just it's a me too. James McCarthy said you're going to hate this when he mentioned the integrity thing, and he's misunderstood the point that I'm making there. I don't think integrity is a misplaced value. I think it's one of the most important values. It's just that everyone believes that they have it, and everyone will tell you that that's one of their core values. James articulated incredibly clearly and very well in a way that was very elegant, which I loved. Go and check that episode out. But making sure that you've got a long-term horizon, you're clear about the ramifications of your decisions, and that they all kind of relate back to your core values. And for me, particularly, it's around that kind of growth, make it happen kind of thing.
Thanks, Josh. So I've learned a lot of things about you over the time that we've been married. A couple of little things in this conversation as well. I think really, if I reflect from somebody who hasn't necessarily got to know you as well as this, the key things from my perspective would be that you had exposure and introduction to the value of money and hard work from a very young age. So any parents listening to this podcast probably consider that being a really foundational aspect. The idea of money is a value exchange, that it's not icky, and that it's just a concept. And the growth, having a value of personal growth and doing everything that you could to learn more. I know that you read so many books, you listen to a lot of podcasts, you have been to conferences, everything. You're so growth focused. And as a business leader and founder, there is no way that you know everything in the world. And so being on a constant journey of learning those new things and knowing what you don't know and going out there and trying to find ways to educate yourself more, so important. And I see that in you every day. And also having your identity as something separate from your actual, the entity of the business being really important as well, knowing who you are that's outside the business so that you're not so connected to the value of the business exit itself, and then knowing that you are somebody else outside that business when you do exit as well. So those are some really key insights I've taken away from our conversation today. And the final question, which I know the answer to, and I'm pretty sure you've alluded to this with another guest as well, but what would your alternative career have been had you not been a business guy?
I love most things automotive and passionate enthusiast of European sports and supercars. And so the single best job in the world to me is Jeremy Clarkson's job, or what it was when he was on the Top Gear show. So that is to fly to exotic locations, so you've got the travel and the experience thing, to drive incredible vehicles with some friends and have a great time, and then write some things in the background, articles and books about that experience whilst kind of being a presenter. If you strip that right back to its core, it's like a motoring journalist extraordinaire. So to me, that would be the best job in the whole world.
Amazing. Then you get to really amazing. Then you really get to lean into your Pogan vibes. Pogan being the posh bogan, which I frequently poke fun at Josh for being, because he still is a bogan at heart, just
Scratch
a little
the
bit more money.
surface. That's right. Exactly. Scratch the surface.
Exactly. Josh, thank you so much for giving us a little bit more insight into your exit journey. And I hope that everybody knows a little bit more about you and why it is that you have chosen this particular subject to help illuminate, because as many people have said, there's so little out there on the specific subject of exits. You've been through a number yourself, and it's been really great to be able to help share your experience with everyone today. Thank you.
Thanks for the grilling, Tina.
You're welcome.